Put yourself in position to win big on Kentucky Derby Day with the power of daily racing form. Visit shop.drf.com and get past performances, expert picks, betting strategies, clock reports, and more. Again, that's shop.drf.com.
Hi everyone, David Aragona and Greg Milkowski here, taking a look at one of the stakes races on Saturday at Churchill Downs, the Grade 2 Pate des Mile. And Craig, of course, the Derby and the Oaks are going to garner the majority of the headlines this week, but there are some really fun handicapping puzzles on this Saturday undercard at Churchill Downs, and this Pate des Mile, certainly one of them.
Yeah, this one certainly fits. There's so many, I haven't got through them all, but this one I have, and it was a fun race to handicap. I think we're going to have a good discussion here. I think there's a lot of directions you could go in a race like this.
Yeah, definitely no clear favorite in this race, as you can tell from the morning line. Echo again, Fort Bragg, General Jim, Gunpile. I won't be surprised if any of those horses go favored, or even the number 1 Kangaroo Court. Just seems very murky as to how this race could get bet. And to make some sense of it, Craig, let's take a look at the Timeform US pace projector for this race to see at least how it might be run in the early stages. And we do have some speed signed on here, I think particularly in the form of the number 1 Kangaroo Court, who's stretching out to a mile for the first time, and the number 5 Echo again, who isn't a need the lead type, but he's just a naturally fast horse.
Yeah, I agree with the pace projector here that the pace could get pretty fast on the front end because we have real speed. As you said, Echo again has shown it several times. Kangaroo Court is a really fast California bred who's been running with some quick ones out there as well. So the class jump for him may not be as big as it appears, and I expect him to be a pace factor.
Yeah, you'll notice the number 4, Midnight Rising, gets that late pace flag on the Timeform US pace projector. We're not going to talk about him in our rundown of the contenders, but he's one that has never been on the dirt before, so we'll see if he's able to produce that late speed in a dirt race. But if the pace does heat up, you do want to pay attention to some of those late runners. Let's also take a look at the Timeform US finish projector, one of the new features in Timeform US. This a visual representation of the Timeform US power picks that you might be familiar with from the classic version of Timeform US. And Greg, I'm not surprised to see these 3 horses shown towards the lead at the finish, including the number 1 Kangaroo Court, who we'll talk about a little bit more in just a second, but he's coming in with some of the fastest speed figures of anybody in this field.
Yeah, he has some questions. We don't build distance into the finish projector. That would be the biggest question for him, but he's certainly run numbers which justify him being on the front end.
And let's dive right into some of those contenders, beginning with the number 1 Kangaroo Court. And we'll take a look at his most recent start in the Echo Eddie Stakes at Santa Anita in early April. And Craig, he's beating a pretty good horse here, a horse that he's defeated twice in a row, Bus Buzz, a very good California-bred sprinter. And you can see these two put on a nice show to the wire. Kangaroo Court is able to just put his head in front as they come onto the wire. And this race, as well as the one prior to it, earned some pretty gaudy speed figures at the Timeform US scale.
Yeah, Bus Buzz was a horse who broke his maiden with a big figure, had a big reputation, but Kangaroo Court obviously is very good too. He broke his maiden by 14, had a bit of a layoff, obviously something went amiss, but to run that 103 early in his 2-year-old season was good, and he's proven he's the goods. He has high speed. He's able to track another horse as he did both of those times and still run through the lane. He handled the extra half furlong. The big question here is, can he handle another furlong and a half?
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical. He looks like a sprinter to me. He's drawn the rail, could be under the gun, so definitely some things to overcome for Kangaroo Court in this race. Let's move on to a couple of horses that are coming out of a stakes at Keeneland, the Lafayette, and we'll take a look at the stretch run of that race. The 3rd and 4th place finishers are the ones you want to focus on, Freezing Point and Lugan Knight, who's just in behind him. And Greg, I think this race is worth discussing because the first 2 finishers in this race who are not running here, Corona Bolt and Hejazi, they're 2 very talented horses who, if they were starting in this Pate des Mile, might be 2 of the favorites. So I think you want to take a note of a horse like Freezing Point, who was actually in contention with them until the late stages.
Yeah, I thought he ran well for sure. I mean, Lugan Knight, not so much. He faded out of it. You can see Freezing Point, his speed figures are heading in the right direction, particularly if you ignore that synthetic track race where he just didn't seem to handle the surface at all. And that 106 doesn't put him too far out of it. You don't often see that for a horse that's 50 to 1 on the morning line.
Yeah, that synthetic race not even as bad as it looks, because that was a very fast pace in the John Battaglia that completely fell apart, and he made an early move into that race. I thought ran very well last time in that 7 furlong Lafayette, and you go back to his 2-year-old season. He earned a 100 time form US speed figure going this 1 mile distance at Churchill when he impressively broke his maiden. So there's a real case to be made for a horse that's 50-1 on the morning line. As for Lugan Knight, who's coming out of that same race, maybe a little tougher to build a case for him, Greg, even though he could go off at a shorter price. He was the Jerome winner from earlier in the year, going the mile distance. Just hasn't really stepped forward since then and actually has regressed a bit.
Yeah, maybe you could give him some slight excuses. He had the mud too back in the Gotham. Last time, maybe it was a little bit short for him. He did seem to enjoy the 1-turn mile at Aqueduct, but I think those excuses are a little bit of a stretch. I would guess he's more tailing off.
Number 5 is Echo Again, and let's take a look at his allowance victory recently at Oaklawn Park. This was going the 1 mile distance, but around 2 turns. Echo Again will be cutting back to a 1-turn configuration for the first time since his debut race at Saratoga, when he generated so much buzz, winning impressively that day. And nice to see Echo Again finally get back to the winner's circle here, Craig. Also interesting that he actually rated and passed horses last time, doing so by taking it over at the top of the stretch and holding off a runner in the late stages, El Tomate. Echo Again definitely has the speed figures to contend here. Just be interesting to see what kind of trip he works out with the turnback.
Yeah, and that last race gives me a little concern that he rated off of it. I understand to go in 2 turns. I mean, that's where the better money is, but it seemed like from the beginning he was going to be a sprinter. My one concern with him is he hasn't really progressed speed figure wise. He's basically run the same in all his races that he's run well. There's a race that doesn't show up where he actually was probably going to win, but there was an accident and they cut the race a little short. It wasn't officially counted, but other than that, LeCompte, he always shows up. I just am not, I don't think he's worth value that he's going to be, because he's probably going to be the favorite in here.
Yeah, he is the favorite on the morning line, and he looked so full of promise in that debut, and I just haven't seen him finish off his races the way that I'd want to see in recent starts. Even last time at Oaklawn, kind of drifting down towards the rail, not striding as fluidly as he had in that debut race. So just some concerns about a horse that could be a short price. It's moved on to the gray that's right to his outside, the number 6 Frosted Departure, and we'll take a look at one of his recent races, actually 3 back in his PPs, the Renaissance Stakes, where he was also facing off against Bourbon Bash, who's back in this field. And Craig, this horse pretty game to hold on to the victory this day, battling with another good one in 2 Eagles River down to the wire. After this, they stretched it out around 2 turns, maybe a little far for him. The turn back should help this horse.
Yeah, I agree. I picked this race to show as opposed to his last 2 because it was the last time he sprinted. I thought he was very game here. He ran a nice speed figure of 107. When you look at his last 2, not only were they probably too long for him, the Southwest he ran fine. In that Rebel, he was just cooked on a ridiculous pace. When you look at the chart for that race, you can see that race was just dominated by horses who came from off the pace. So I thought he ran better than looked here, and I think he's a horse with a chance.
The number 8 Bourbon Bash also coming out of that Renaissance Stakes. He's actually run 3 times since then, including an effort that wasn't so bad in that Rebel when he finished 5th behind some horses that we're going to see in the Kentucky Derby. Didn't run nearly as well in the Arkansas Derby, Craig. He's just sort of an in and out horse. It's hard to know what to expect from him from race to race. We'll see if the turn back in distance helps.
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical of him. Even that Rebel, which looks pretty good, that's the one I mentioned, was horses who came from out of it kind of dominated. And of those, he really didn't have much left in the lane when all the others who were in similar positions early were finishing a lot stronger.
Very interesting contender in this race is the number 7 Fort Bragg, another horse that's coming out of some Kentucky Derby preps, setting his sights a little bit lower here in this Pat Day Mile and turning back in distance. And we're not going to show the replay, Craig, but his Florida Derby trip is worth going back to watch, because it might not be so apparent from looking at the running line, but he broke slowly with Mage at the back of the pack in that race and had to be used very aggressively in the first quarter to run past the entire field to take the lead. And after that, actually set a fast pace, some red color-coded speed figure. So he had every right to get tired at the end, and that was also going 1.1 1/8. I've been saying this since the horse's 2-year-old season. I don't think this horse gets better with added distance. I think shorter is better for him. So he's finally turning back in this race. We'll see if he can put it all together.
Yeah, that's the question. Can he put it together? Because that was an impressive run early. It seems like the turn back in distance is a logical step for him. He's going to have to show up and run his good race, but I think it's a possibility. Definitely a contender.
The number 9 is General Jim. Let's take a look at his last race when he won the Swale all the way back in early February at Gulfstream. And this was a 1-turn 7 furlong, so I guess bodes well for him getting the mile here. He actually run pretty well in his prior stakes attempt going a mile when he probably was going to win the Mucho Macho Man, but got in some traffic trouble in the stretch. Craig, if you remember, this was a horse that was entered in the Fountain of Youth, I think came up with a temperature, had to scratch from that race, and now we haven't seen him since then, and he's picked a tough spot to come back off the layoff.
Yeah, it's a very tough spot. His high speed figure on dirt was at 104 last time. Now, granted, that came 3 months ago. Maybe he could progress some, but it almost seems like this is a starting point to me to kick off his season again after the setback. I'd be skeptical that he's going to get the job done.
The number 10 is Curly Jack, and he definitely had some ability as a 2-year-old. He was a good second in the Kentucky Jockey Club over this Churchill Downs course to close out his juvenile season. But Craig, I just haven't seen him do much running at all in his 2 starts so far as a 3-year-old. I know he was kind of against the slow pace in the Louisiana Derby last time, but he had nothing to offer in the stretch. I just wonder if this horse is any good anymore.
Yeah, I have the same concerns. Yeah, maybe you could put a line through that last race, though. You'd like to see him show at least some kind of ability in the stretch, which he didn't. The race 2 back really concerns me. He didn't do much running there either. It seems like the turn back is maybe just throwing something at the wall and seeing if it sticks to get him back to the good form he showed very early in his career.
The number 11 is Gilmore. Let's take a look at his last race when he was second in the Bayshore. He's another one of these former Bob Baffert runners. Him switched to Brendan Walsh instead of Timmy Octane. And you could see he's pretty far back at the stretch here. He was actually closer up early in the race, dropped back on the turn, but then is coming in again at the end. And actually he's finishing best of all through the final 1/8 of a mile of this race and kind of running between horses that come onto the wire here. Seems like a horse that's still sort of figuring things out, Craig, but I do like the 1-turn mile for him.
Yeah, I think it's good. He didn't run a very good speed figure last time. He had run better earlier in his career. He's going to need to take a pretty big jump up. That wasn't the strongest Bayshore we're going to see. So he's not for me in here, but it wouldn't shock me if he won. He has shown plenty of ability.
The number 12 is Gun Pilot. Let's take a look at his last race, the Hot Springs at Oaklawn Park, a minor stakes event. And Craig, I know the speed figure came back okay, makes him a contender in here. I didn't like that he lost this race because if you watch the early portion, there were 4 speeds signed on who duked it out on the front end. He was the closer in that 4-speed situation in a 5-horse field, and he just could never run down Iron Clover, who ran a better race than he did. I have some concerns about this horse.
I do as well. And you mentioned the speed figure. I even have concerns about that. This was a slow race by the clock. It didn't fit at all with the rest of the day. There was no way I could rate it with all the others, or the speed figure would have been like an 80 or some crazy low number. I have concerns that maybe I overrated it because the run backs haven't been good from the race. So for me, I'm always going to be skeptical when the speed figure may not be legit. And that's what we're telling you with that beat. We broke it out from the others. It's one I may actually go back and revise. And even if it was legit, I have the same concerns as you. He got a perfect trip and wasn't able to get the job done.
And number 13 is Damon's Mound. He's a horse that had showed a lot of ability last year as a 2-year-old. Impressive maiden winner at Churchill, and here he is winning the Saratoga Special over Gulfport, who was very highly regarded at the time last summer. Was unable to stretch out in the Iroquois, going 1 1/16. Didn't show much coming off the layoff on the turf last time. Now they're going to try to go to the 1-turn mile. I just wonder if this was a precocious horse that didn't go on, Craig.
It sure seems that way. He hasn't looked good at all in the last two races. Maybe you could use the surface as well. You could use the surface as an excuse, but he just showed no run whatsoever. So for me, I guess you could get to him. Maybe if he's going to be that 20-1 morning line, you could say he didn't like the distance. He didn't like the 2 turns of the Iroquois. He's more a 1-turn horse, but seems like a stretch to me. And I'm a little skeptical he'll be that high given his early reputation.
Well, Craig, let's throw up our picks for this race. And I think that we're both hoping that the sire Frosted has a good day on Saturday at Churchill Downs, because we've each taken different sons of Frosted in this race, both big prices on the morning line. And I just think this is that kind of race where you do want to do a little bit of price shopping, because there are cases to be made for a lot of horses, some of which are going to get overbet.
Yeah, when there's a case to be made for a lot of horses, I don't want to land on a short horse. I went with Frosted Departure. I think I really liked what I saw in the Rebel, even though he packed it in. He was part of that really hot speed duel, ran fast fractions. I like his post position here. I don't think he has to have the lead. I think he could sit in 3rd or 4th. And I just think he's a lot better than that 20 to morning line would indicate around the 1-turn mile.
Yeah, I didn't include Frosted Departure in my picks, but I actually agree with everything you're saying, and he's definitely one that I could consider at a price in this race. I went for a horse that's 50-1 on the morning line, the number 14 Freezing Point, and I see from your picks, Greg, you don't completely disagree with me. This horse just makes a lot of sense. Looking at this recent speed figures, he's now 3rd off the layoff. He improved last time in that Lafayette Stakes, running a number that makes him competitive here. He's got the win over the distance, and these are connections that are not going to take any money, but I just think he makes a lot of sense in this field. So definitely one that I want to key some wagers around.
Yeah, I have no problem. Obviously, I have him 4th. We could probably make a lot of videos before we both have a 50-1 shot in our top 4.
Well, that's a look at the Grade 2 Pat Day Mile on Saturday at Churchill Downs. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.